The entire ballroom went silent when the Korean billionaire stood before the one woman who had refused every dollar he ever offered her. He offered her a black card worth more than she'd earn in a year. She put it back on his car. "I don't want your money." The rain came down in sheets over Fifth Avenue the night Cho Woojin's black Bentley clipped the edge of a puddle and sent a wave of filthy water crashing straight into Nadia Brooks. Her coffee. Her bag. Her entire week's tips, scattered across the sidewalk and dissolving into the gutter. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stood there, soaked to the bone, staring at the car door as it opened and a man stepped out like the street belonged to him, tailored charcoal suit, unbothered expression, phone still glowing in his other hand. "Send her the cleaning bill," Woojin said, not even looking up. "And get her a new bag. Whatever she wants." He held out a black card between two fingers, the kind of card that could buy a building in this city, without ever breaking eye contact with his phone screen. Nadia looked down at it. Then up at him. Then, slowly, she reached out and set it, gently, deliberately, back onto the hood of his car. "I don't want your money," she said. "I want an apology." There's a difference. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Cho Woojin had absolutely nothing to say. If you've ever met someone who refused to be bought, someone who looked right through your money like it was nothing, drop a black heart in the comments right now, because this story is about exactly that kind of woman, and what she does to a man who has never once been told no. Woojin didn't chase after her. He didn't need to. He stood in the rain for a full 10 seconds, watching a barista in a soaked apron walk away from more money than she'd see in a year, and something in his chest cracked open that he didn't have a name for yet. He was 32 years old, heir to the Cho Group, a shipping and tech empire that stretched from Seoul to Singapore to this very street corner in New York. He had never paid for anything with patience. Every door in his life had opened because of who he was, not because he'd earned the key. Women smiled at him because of the name stitched into his suit. Board members nodded because of the numbers attached to his signature. And somewhere along the way, he'd stopped noticing the difference between respect and fear. Nadia Brooks didn't fear him. She didn't even seem to notice him, not the way people usually did. And that, more than anything, was what kept him standing on that sidewalk long after his driver had already pulled the car around. The next morning, he told his assistant, June Kim, to find her. Find her for what, exactly? June asked, not looking up from his tablet. He'd worked for Woojin for 6 years, and had learned that most of his boss's whims burned out by lunch. To compensate her properly. You tried that. She gave the card back. Then I'll find another way. June finally looked up. Sir, respectfully, it's a ruined blouse and a spilled latte. This is beneath your time. Woojin didn't answer. He was already looking out the window, replaying the exact moment she'd set that card down like it weighed nothing at all. It took June less than a day to track her down, Ember and Oak, a small cafe 4 blocks from the accident, tucked between a laundromat and a bookstore that had seen better decades. Nadia worked mornings there, 6 days a week, and picked up her nephew, Marcus, from school most afternoons while her sister covered a second job across town. Her life ran on tight math, rent, tips, bus fare, and whatever was left over at the end of the month, which usually wasn't much. Woojin had a florist deliver 24 white roses to the cafe the next morning. Nadia thanked the delivery boy politely, carried the flowers to the counter, and by lunchtime they'd been split into small vases and handed out to every regular who walked through the door, including an elderly man named Mr. Alvarez who came in every day and ordered the same black coffee and never smiled, until that day. Woojin heard about it from June that evening and felt something he rarely felt, outmaneuvered. He tried again. A designer handbag this time, the kind with a 2-year wait list. Nadia opened the box, looked at it for a long moment, and then donated it to a fundraiser the cafe was running for a family whose apartment had burned down 2 blocks over. It sold at auction for $4,000, and every cent went to the family. He tried a reservation at Solene, the restaurant with a 6-month waiting list that even senators couldn't skip. Nadia declined the invitation politely, through June, since Woojin didn't have the nerve to ask her himself by then, and said she had a shift. She's not playing hard to get, June said carefully, watching his boss stare at the rejected reservation confirmation like it had personally insulted him. I don't think she's playing anything at all. Then what does she want? Maybe, June said, you should ask her instead of sending things at her. So the next morning, for the first time in his adult life, Cho Woojin walked into a coffee shop by himself, ordered a plain black coffee, and sat down at a small table by the window like a regular person. Nadia clocked him within seconds. You're the guy from the accident. I am. You're also the guy who's been trying to bury me in gifts for 2 weeks. I am that guy too. He almost smiled. I owe you an apology. A real one. Not a card. She studied him for a moment, arms crossed, clearly deciding whether this was worth her time. Then she pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. Fine, she said. Talk. He did. Clumsily at first, he wasn't used to explaining himself to anyone, but the words came easier the longer she listened without flinching. He told her he'd been careless that night, not just with the car, but with how he moved through the world in general, assuming everything could be smoothed over with a transaction. She didn't let him off easy. She asked him real questions. Why he never looked up from his phone. Whether he'd ever ridden a public bus. Whether he had any friends who weren't on his payroll. He didn't have great answers. She laughed at him anyway, not unkindly, but not gently either, and for the first time in years, Woojin found himself laughing too. He came back the next morning. And the one after that. He learned her order, a small oat milk latte, extra hot, 1 sugar, and he learned that she had a golden retriever named Copper who waited for her outside the shop's back door every evening like clockwork. He learned that she'd wanted to study early childhood education before her sister's situation forced her to pick up extra shifts instead. He learned that she rolled her eyes at his suits and called him corporate for the first month, and somewhere in there, without either of them quite marking the moment, corporate stopped being a joke and started sounding like something closer to a nickname only she was allowed to use. You know what your problem is, she told him one morning, wiping down the counter while he sat there in a suit that cost more than her monthly rent. You've never had to wait for anything in your life. Not a table, not a person, not an answer. You think patience is optional. And what's your problem? He shot back, half smiling. I don't have one. I've got rent, a nephew who needs new sneakers, and a boss who cuts my hours if I'm 2 minutes late. That's not a problem, corporate. That's Tuesday. He almost said something about how he could fix all of that with 1 phone call, the old instinct rising fast and automatic, and then he caught himself, swallowed it, and said instead, tell me about your nephew. She blinked at him, surprised, like she'd been waiting to see if he'd take the bait and buy his way into her life again. When he didn't, something in her posture eased. His name's Marcus. He's 8. Wants to be an astronaut, then a chef, then an astronaut again, depending on the day. She smiled, soft and unguarded in a way he hadn't seen from her before. He'd probably like you, actually. He's obsessed with anything expensive. Would you let him meet me? Ask me again in a month, she said, but she was still smiling when she said it, and he counted that as progress. He tried one more gift after that, not diamonds this time, not a bag, but a set of children's astronomy books for Marcus, dropped off anonymously through the cafe's donation box so she couldn't trace it back and hand it off to charity out of spite. It was the first gift she kept. 6,000 miles away in Seoul, Cho Woojin, chairwoman of the Cho Group, and the only person alive Woojin had ever fully feared, noticed her grandson's calls had gotten shorter. Distracted. She noticed he'd missed 2 board calls in 3 weeks, something he had never once done in his life. So she made a call of her own. The Bay merger finalizes in 6 weeks, she told him, her voice even and final the way it always was. Minister Bay has made it clear the partnership is contingent on more than paperwork. Yuna is a good match. The engagement announcement goes out with the merger. Woojin gripped the phone tighter than he meant to. Grandmother, we haven't discussed. There is nothing to discuss. This is not a request, Woojin. This is the future of everything your grandfather built. I expect you in Seoul within the month to finalize it properly. The line went dead before he could answer. He sat in his office for a long time after that call, staring at the skyline, feeling for the first time in his life like the empire he was supposed to inherit was actually a cage with very good lighting. If you saw that arranged marriage twist coming from a mile away, type CTO in the comments right now, and stay with me, because what happens next is the moment that changes everything. He didn't tell Nadia right away. Some nights he almost did, sitting across from her in a booth long after the cafe had closed, Kappa's head resting on his expensive shoes like the dog had claimed him as property. But every time the words rose in his throat, he swallowed them back down, terrified that the second she learned who he really was, what he really was, what was expected of him, she'd walk away the same way she'd walked away from that black card. Instead, he stalled. He told June to slow the merger paperwork by any means necessary. He told his grandmother he needed more time. And he kept showing up at Ember and Oak every single morning, holding on to those hours like they were the only real thing in his life. The night everything shifted, it was raining again, the same kind of rain as the night they met, like the city itself was determined to circle them back to the beginning. Nadia's shift ran late, and Copper was soaked through by the time she got outside, and Woojin, without thinking twice, pulled his car around and told her to get in before she caught pneumonia standing on the curb arguing about it. Copper climbed into the back seat of a car worth more than most people's houses and shook mud and rainwater across leather upholstery that had never once been touched by anything less than a professional detailer. Woojin didn't say a word about it. He just watched Nadia laugh, really laugh, head back, eyes closed, and decided in that moment that he would let that dog ruin every car he owned if it meant hearing that sound again. You know, she said, once her laughter settled, watching the city blur past the window, you're different than I thought you'd be. That first night, I thought you were just another guy who thinks a black card fixes everything. I was that guy. Were you? He was quiet for a moment. You're the first person who's argued with me, and won in longer than I can remember. Maybe ever. She looked over at him, something softening in her expression that hadn't been there before. That why you keep coming back? Because I don't let you win. That's part of it. He kept his eyes on the road, because he wasn't sure he could say the rest of it while looking at her. Mostly it's because for 1 hour every morning, nobody wants anything from me except conversation. I didn't know how much I needed that until you gave it to me. Nadia didn't answer right away. But when he glanced over at a red light, she was smiling at him in a way she'd never let herself smile before, unguarded, a little stunned by her own feelings, the way people look when they realize something has already happened before they gave themselves permission to feel it. Can I ask you something? She said, quieter now, watching the wipers cut through the rain. Are you ever going to tell me what you're actually running from every morning? Because I don't think it's just coffee. His hands tightened slightly on the wheel. It's complicated. It's always complicated with rich men. That's usually the part right before it gets messy. It's not like that. He exhaled, searching for words he'd never had to use before, because he'd never had to explain himself to anyone who could just as easily walk away. There's a lot waiting for me back home. Expectations. A family that's already decided who I'm supposed to become before I've had a say in it. And every morning I sit across from you, and for 1 hour, none of that exists. You don't want anything from me except honesty. I didn't know that was rare until you were the one giving it to me. That's not an answer, Woojin. It was the first time she'd used his real name instead of the nickname, and it landed heavier than either of them expected. That's a really beautiful way of not answering. He looked at her, really looked, torn between the truth and the fear of losing the 1 hour of his day that felt like it belonged to him. I know, he said finally. Give me time. I'll tell you everything. I promise. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly, choosing to trust him even though every instinct told her that promises from men like him rarely survived contact with reality. Okay, corporate. Time. But not forever. He should have told her about Seoul that night. About Yuna. About the merger and the deadline and his grandmother's voice on the phone. He meant to. He didn't. 3 weeks later, Cho Woojin flew to New York without warning. She arrived at the Cho Group Tower with a schedule already built, a gala already planned, and Yuna already seated at the head table as the guest of honor, a public, unmistakable announcement dressed up as a welcome party. And in a decision that would later strike June as either genius or cruelty, depending on the day he was asked, Woojin had personally arranged the catering. Ember and Oak had been hired, sight unseen by Woojin, to cater the appetizer course. Nadia didn't know whose party it was until she walked into the ballroom in her catering blazer, tray in hand, and saw Woojin standing at the front of the room in a tuxedo, next to an elegant woman in a jewel-toned gown who was very clearly not just another guest. She almost turned around and walked straight back out. She might have, if Woojin hadn't spotted her first. Woojin said, crossing the room with the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. The barista my grandson has been so distracted by. She reached into her clutch and pulled out several folded bills, pressing them into Nadia's hand in front of at least 30 guests. For your trouble. You may go now. The staff exit is that way. The room went quiet in that particular way rooms go quiet, when everyone is pretending not to listen. Nadia's hand closed around the cash. Her jaw tightened, but her voice, when it came, was steady. Thank you, she said, with a dignity that made the insult land harder on everyone else in the room than it did on her. She set the tray down gently on the nearest table, turned, and started walking toward the door Sianhua had pointed to. She made it 4 steps before Woojin's voice cut across the ballroom. "Nadia! Stop!" Every head turned. Nadia turned too, slowly, and found him already crossing the room toward her, ignoring his grandmother, ignoring Yuna, ignoring 300 years of Cho family expectations staring at him from every direction. "You don't have to leave," he said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "This is my party. And you're not staff here. You never were." Sianhua's voice cracked across the room like a whip. "Woojin! Enough!" He turned to face her, and for the first time in his life, he didn't flinch. "No," he said. "I'm done pretending obedience is the same thing as love, grandmother. I'm done being managed like an asset on a balance sheet." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document, setting it on the nearest table. "I restructured my shares 4 months ago. Quietly, legally, and completely out of your reach. This merger cannot happen without my signature, and my signature is not for sale, not for Bay Industries, and not for a woman I've never once had a real conversation with." Yuna, to her credit, looked more relieved than insulted. Sianhua's face had gone the color of chalk. "You would throw away everything your grandfather built for a barista?" "I would build something new," Woojin said, "with someone who never once cared what I was worth." "You married grandfather against your own mother's wishes." June found the letters in the family archive last week, the ones you kept hidden for 50 years. "You know exactly what this feels like. You just decided I wasn't allowed to have it." The ballroom was silent. Sianhua said nothing at all, the first time in living memory anyone in that family had seen her without a response ready. "Type like right now if you're sitting there with your jaw on the floor, because we are not done yet." Nadia didn't say anything either, not right away. She looked at Woojin standing there in front of everyone who mattered to him, choosing her out loud, in public, with nothing to gain from it and everything to lose. Then she looked down at the cash still folded in her hand, walked back across the ballroom, and set it gently on the table in front of Sianhua, the same quiet gesture she'd used on a black card, weeks and a lifetime ago. "I don't want your money either," she said. "I never did." Then she walked out, alone, and this time nobody followed her, because both of them understood that some things needed room to breathe before they could become real. 6 weeks passed. The merger collapsed formally, quietly, and the business press speculated for exactly 1 news cycle before moving on to the next scandal. Woojin didn't call Nadia during those 6 weeks, and she didn't reach out to him either, because a public declaration wasn't the same thing as an apology, and both of them knew that a love proven on a stage still needed to hold up in the ordinary light of a Tuesday morning. On the first Tuesday of the 7th week, Woojin walked into Ember and Oak with something small and wrapped in brown paper. Not flowers. Not a designer box. He set it on the counter in front of her, and for the first time since she'd known him, his hands weren't steady. Inside was a wooden bookmark, hand-carved, slightly uneven on one edge where the wood had split under an unpracticed hand. It had taken him 4 attempts and 2 cut fingers to make. "I made it myself," he said. "It's not good. I know it's not good. But it's mine, and it's yours now, and it's the only thing I've ever given you that money had nothing to do with." Nadia turned it over in her hands, tracing the rough edge with her thumb, and behind him, the cafe door opened again. Cho Sianhua stepped inside, out of a hanbok and jewels for once, dressed plainly, standing quietly at the back of the line like anyone else waiting for their coffee. "I came to order the normal way," she said, when Nadia looked up, startled. "I understand that's how it's done here." It wasn't an apology. Not in words. But it was a woman used to being served, standing in line like everyone else, in the one place that had taught her grandson everything she'd failed to. Nadia understood exactly what it cost her to walk through that door. Copper trotted over and sat on Woojin's shoes like he'd never left, and Nadia laughed, that same unguarded laugh from the rainy car ride, the one he now knew he'd chase for the rest of his life. She slipped the bookmark into her apron pocket, right against her heart, and said the only thing that mattered. "Took you long enough, corporate." If this story hit you right in the chest, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one, and drop a comment telling me which moment got you the most, because this family isn't done yet, and neither are we.